The crack of a rifle echoed through the Montana wilderness as Catherine Winters ducked beneath a stack of hay bales, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst from her chest. Blood trickled from a small cut on her cheek where Frank's ring had caught her skin during their last confrontation. In the 6 years of their marriage, she'd never seen him like this, wild-eyed and murderous, whiskey turning his usual cruelty into something far more dangerous. "I know you're out here somewhere, Catherine," Frank's voice boomed across the property. "You think you can just leave? After everything I've done for you, I'll find you before sunrise, and when I do..." She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. The June night of 1876 was warm, but Catherine shivered uncontrollably as she huddled deeper into the shadows of the barn. Her cotton dress was torn at the sleeve, and the purple bruises blooming on her arms told the story of a marriage that had dissolved into violence and fear. She hadn't planned to run tonight. After years of enduring Frank's increasingly volatile behavior, Catherine had been carefully setting aside small amounts of money, preparing for an escape that would take her far from the isolated ranch where her husband had systematically cut her off from family and friends. But tonight, something in Frank had snapped completely when he found the small pouch of coins she'd hidden beneath a floorboard in their bedroom. "You ungrateful whore," he had roared, grabbing her by the throat. "Planning to run off with my money, are you? I'll put you in the ground before I let that happen." Catherine had managed to break free, fleeing barefoot across the yard toward the barn while Frank stumbled back to retrieve his rifle. Now, with nowhere to go and miles of wilderness between her and the nearest town, she could only pray for a miracle as she heard his heavy footsteps approaching the barn door. The barn door creaked open, and a shaft of moonlight spilled across the dirt floor. Catherine held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the corner behind a pile of feed sacks. "Catherine," Frank's voice was suddenly quiet, almost gentle, which frightened her more than his shouting. "Come on out now. I've calmed down. We can talk about this like civilized folk." She didn't move, didn't breathe. His boots scraped across the floor as he moved between the stalls, checking each one methodically. "I'm going to count to 3, he said, cocking the rifle. 1, a horse whinnied from outside, followed by the distinct sound of approaching hoofbeats. Frank paused, 2. The hoofbeats grew louder, and another voice called out, a man's voice, deep and unfamiliar. "Hello, the house. Anyone home?" Frank cursed under his breath. "Stay hidden if you want," he hissed in Catherine's direction. "But remember, you're my wife, and you're not going anywhere." He retreated from the barn, closing the door behind him. Catherine released her breath in a shuddering gasp, straining to hear the conversation outside. The stranger's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Evening, sir. Name's Henry Blackwood. My horse came up lame about 2 miles back. Was hoping I might impose on your hospitality for the night." "This ain't no hotel," Frank replied gruffly. "Town's another day's ride." "I'd be obliged for just a corner of your barn," the stranger Henry persisted. "Happy to pay for the trouble." There was a long pause before Frank responded. "Fine, $10. You can sleep in the barn, but be gone by first light." "Much appreciated." Catherine's mind raced. A stranger meant a witness, which meant Frank would have to wait to deal with her. It might give her the time she needed to formulate a plan, but it also meant she needed to stay hidden from both Frank and this newcomer. She couldn't trust anyone. She heard the barn door open again and quickly ducked down, watching through a small gap between hay bales as a tall figure led a limping horse inside. In the dim moonlight filtering through the cracks in the barn walls, she could make out broad shoulders and the silhouette of a cowboy hat. The stranger moved with quiet efficiency, removing his horse's saddle and examining its leg with gentle hands. "There now, Jupiter," he murmured to the animal. "We'll get you rested up." Catherine shifted slightly, and a small piece of straw crackled beneath her. The man froze. "Who's there?" He called softly, reaching for the gun at his hip. Catherine remained perfectly still, praying he would assume it was just a barn mouse or some other creature. But the cowboy moved toward her hiding place with cautious steps. "I know someone's there," he said. "I'm not looking for trouble." When he was just a few feet away, Catherine made a split-second decision. This stranger might be her only chance. She emerged slowly from behind the hay bales, her hands raised. "Please," she whispered, "don't tell him I'm here." Henry Blackwood stared at the woman before him, taking in her disheveled appearance, the torn dress, the bruised arms, the cut on her cheek, and the unmistakable fear in her eyes. Understanding dawned on his face. "The man outside," he said quietly. "He your husband." Catherine nodded, eyes darting nervously to the barn door. "And I reckon you're hiding from him for good reason." "It wasn't a question. He's going to kill me," Catherine whispered. "He found out I was planning to leave." Henry's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, women trapped with men who treated them like property rather than people. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, however, were kind. "My name's Henry," he said, "and I think you might need some help, madam." "Catherine," she replied, "Catherine Winters. And yes, I do need help, but you don't understand. Frank won't just let me go. He's been drinking and he has his rifle." "I understand more than you might think," Henry said grimly. He glanced toward the house where a lamp still burned in the window. "Where were you planning to go?" "Anywhere," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I have a cousin in Colorado. I've been saving, but Frank found my money tonight and—" She gestured helplessly at her bruised face. Henry nodded thoughtfully. "My horse is lame, but he can still carry you if we're careful. Once we get to town, I can help you get on a stage to Colorado." "We," Catherine whispered, hardly daring to hope. "You'd help a stranger." "Some things are just plain wrong, madam," Henry said simply. "And a man raising his hand to a woman is one of them." A sound from outside made them both freeze. Frank's voice carried clearly as he spoke to someone, probably himself, given his drunken state. "Think you can hide forever, Catherine? Think again. Come morning, we're going to have a reckoning, you and me." Henry put a finger to his lips and gestured for Catherine to return to her hiding place. "Stay there," he whispered. "I need to think." Catherine nodded and retreated behind the hay bales as Henry returned to tending his horse. She watched him through the gap, this stranger who had offered help without hesitation. There was something solid about him, a quiet confidence that made her want to trust him despite years of learning not to trust anyone. Henry worked quietly, occasionally murmuring to his horse as he thought through their options. The ranch was isolated, and Catherine's husband was armed and clearly dangerous. Even if his horse wasn't lame, making a run for it in the dark across unfamiliar terrain would be risky. But waiting until morning might be even more dangerous. After what seemed like hours, the light in the house finally went out. Catherine emerged cautiously from her hiding place. "He's probably passed out by now," she whispered. "The whiskey, it's the only blessing in this whole mess." Henry nodded. "We'll wait another hour to be sure, then we'll go. Can you ride?" "Yes," Catherine said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "My father taught me before." She trailed off, thinking of the vibrant young woman she had been before Frank had systematically broken her down. "Good," Henry said. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly. Is there anything in the house you need to take?" Catherine thought of the small pouch of coins Frank had discovered, of the few treasured possessions she'd planned to take with her. "No," she said finally. "There's nothing there worth risking my life for." Henry nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Smart thinking. Jupiter can carry us both for a short distance, but we'll need to take it slow because of his leg. Once we're far enough away, we can stop and figure out our next move." They waited in tense silence, Catherine constantly glancing toward the door, expecting Frank to burst in at any moment. Henry took the opportunity to examine his horse's leg more thoroughly, wrapping it with strips torn from a spare shirt in his saddlebag. "How did you end up here?" Catherine asked softly, needing conversation to distract her from her fear. Henry continued working as he answered. "I've been driving cattle up from Texas. This is my third season on the trail, was heading back south when Jupiter here stepped in a prairie dog hole." He patted the horse's flank affectionately. "Thought I'd cut through this way, avoid some of the more traveled routes, wasn't expecting to find." He glanced at her bruises. "This kind of trouble?" "I'm sorry," Catherine said automatically, the apology as instinctive as breathing after years with Frank. Henry looked up sharply. "You have nothing to apologize for, Mrs. Winters." "Catherine," she corrected him. "Please call me Catherine." He nodded. "Catherine then, and there's still no need for apologies." An hour passed slowly, marked only by the occasional sounds of the night and Jupiter's soft nickering. Finally, Henry deemed it safe enough to move. "I'll help you up first," he whispered, leading his horse to the barn door and listening intently before easing it open a crack. The house remained dark and silent. Henry boosted Catherine onto Jupiter's back, then swung up behind her, wincing slightly as the horse shifted under their combined weight. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Just a little ways, then we'll give you a rest." They rode out slowly, Henry guiding the horse away from the house and toward a stand of trees that would provide some cover. Catherine sat rigidly in front of him, every muscle tense as she expected to hear Frank's voice or the crack of his rifle at any moment. But there was only silence as they made their way through the darkness, the moon providing just enough light to see by. Once they reached the trees, Henry urged Jupiter into a slightly quicker pace, though still careful of the horse's injury. "Where are we going?" Catherine whispered, aware of Henry's solid presence behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins. "There's a small creek about 5 miles from here," Henry replied. "We can stop there, let Jupiter rest, and figure out our next move. Town's about 20 miles beyond that." Catherine nodded, allowing herself to breathe a little easier with each step that took them farther from the ranch. The night air felt clean and fresh in her lungs, carrying the scent of pine and grass instead of Frank's whiskey and rage. They rode in silence for a time, both alert for any sign of pursuit. The tension in Catherine's body gradually eased as the distance between them and the ranch increased. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along tonight." "Don't thank me yet," Henry replied. "We're not in the clear. Your husband seems like the type to come looking once he realizes you're gone." "He will," Catherine confirmed. "Frank doesn't let go of what he considers his property." She spoke the bitter words matter-of-factly, years of experience behind them. "How long were you married?" Henry asked. 6 years, Catherine replied. "Though it feels like a lifetime. I was 18 when we met." "He was so charming then, so different from the man he became once we were married." Henry nodded, though she couldn't see his face. "I've seen it before. Some men, they put on a good face until they have what they want, then the mask comes off." "Were you married?" Catherine asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No need to apologize," Henry said. "And no, I never married, came close once, but she decided a cowboy's life wasn't for her. Can't say I blamed her." "It's a hard way to live, always on the move." They lapsed into silence again as Jupiter picked his way carefully through the darkness. The moon slipped behind a cloud, making the night even darker. In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound eerily beautiful in the vast silence. When they reached the creek Henry had mentioned, he helped Catherine dismount before sliding down himself. Jupiter immediately lowered his head to drink from the clear water. "We should rest here for a bit," Henry said, removing the horse's saddle to give the animal a break. "Dawn's still a few hours off." Catherine nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The rush of fear and adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, leaving her drained. She sank down onto a fallen log by the creek, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water. Henry unrolled a blanket from his pack and offered it to her. "It gets cold in the small hours," he explained. "You should try to get some sleep. I'll keep watch." "Thank you," Catherine said, accepting the blanket gratefully. She wrapped it around her shoulders, its rough wool texture somehow comforting. "What happens when we reach town?" Henry settled himself against a tree trunk, his rifle across his knees. "There's a stagecoach that comes through every few days. We can get you on it, headed south." "You said you have family in Colorado," my cousin Emma, Catherine confirmed. "We wrote letters until Frank put a stop to it. I haven't heard from her in over a year, but she always said I could come to her if I needed help." Henry nodded. "Colorado's a good place to make a fresh start. Growing fast, lots of opportunities." "What about you?" Catherine asked. "Won't Frank come after you too once he realizes you helped me?" A grim smile touched Henry's lips. "Let him try." There was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that wasn't bravado but experience. Catherine found herself wondering about this man, what his life had been like, what had shaped him into someone who would risk himself for a stranger in trouble. "You should rest," Henry said again, his voice gentler. Tomorrow will be a long day. Catherine nodded, though she doubted she could sleep. She lay down on the soft ground near the creek, the blanket pulled tight around her. To her surprise, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, drawing her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the gentle touch of a hand on her shoulder and Henry's low voice. "Catherine, sun's coming up. We should move." Catherine sat up quickly, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous night came rushing back. The sky was lightening to a pale gray in the east, stars fading as dawn approached. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, noticing the tiredness around Henry's eyes. "I got enough," he replied, already saddling Jupiter. "How are you feeling?" Catherine took stock of herself. Her body ached from the bruises Frank had inflicted, and her muscles were stiff from sleeping on the ground, but her mind felt clearer than it had in years. "Better," she said simply. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Henry's provisions, then mounted up again. Jupiter seemed to have benefited from the rest, though Henry was still careful not to push the horse too hard as they continued their journey. The Montana landscape stretched out around them, beautiful in the early morning light. Rolling hills covered in grass that rippled like water in the gentle breeze, stands of pine trees dark against the brightening sky, and in the distance, the jagged peaks of mountains. Catherine drank it all in, seeing the beauty of the land with new eyes now that it no longer felt like a prison. "Frank will be awake by now," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "He'll know I'm gone. We've got a good head start," Henry reassured her, "and he won't know which way we went." But they both knew Frank would guess they'd headed for town. It was the only logical destination. Catherine tried to push away the fear that threatened to overwhelm her newfound hope. As the sun climbed higher, they occasionally stopped to rest Jupiter and to drink from Henry's canteen. The day grew warmer, and Catherine's torn dress offered little protection from the sun. Henry noticed her discomfort and offered her his hat, which she gratefully accepted. "Tell me about your cousin in Colorado," Henry said as they rode, clearly trying to keep her mind occupied with thoughts of the future rather than fears about the present. Catherine smiled faintly. "Emma is 3 years older than me. We grew up together in Illinois. She married a man named Joseph Carter who had mining interests in Colorado. Last I heard, they were doing well. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl." "Sounds like good folks," Henry commented. "They are," Catherine agreed. "Emma always had a mind of her own. When we were girls, she was always the one leading us into adventures and occasionally trouble." The memory brought a genuine smile to her face. "And what about you?" Henry asked. "What kind of girl were you before Frank?" The question caught Catherine off guard. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as anything other than Frank's wife, Frank's possession. "I was happy," she said slowly, searching for words to describe the person she'd once been. "Curious about the world. I loved to read novels especially. My father was a schoolteacher and he encouraged my education. I even thought I might become a teacher myself someday." "That's still possible," Henry pointed out. "Colorado will need teachers for all those new settlers coming in." The idea landed like a revelation in Catherine's mind. A future. A real future doing something meaningful, being someone beyond a frightened, abused wife. "Yes," she said, with more conviction than she'd felt in years. "Yes, it is possible." They continued riding through the morning, the terrain becoming more rugged as they followed a trail that wound through increasingly hilly country. Henry kept them off the main paths, clearly concerned about Frank potentially following their tracks. Around midday, they stopped in a sheltered hollow where a small spring bubbled up from the rocks. Henry dismounted first, then helped Catherine down. Her legs were stiff and sore from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Henry caught her by the arms, steadying her. "Careful there," he said softly. For a moment they stood close, his hands still on her arms, and something passed between them, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with their precarious situation. Catherine stepped back first, confused by the unexpected feeling. "Thank you," she murmured, turning away to hide the flush she could feel spreading across her cheeks. Henry cleared his throat and busied himself with checking Jupiter's leg while Catherine knelt by the spring to splash cool water on her face. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a subtle change in the atmosphere. They ate another simple meal in companionable silence. Catherine found herself studying Henry when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved with confident precision, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "How much farther to town?" she asked eventually, breaking the silence. "We should reach it by nightfall if we keep a steady pace," Henry replied. "Though I'm thinking we might want to approach carefully. Your husband might expect you to head there." Catherine nodded, the fear she'd managed to keep at bay surging back. "What do you suggest?" Henry considered for a moment. "There's a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, belongs to a man named Miller. He's a good sort. We could stop there, see if he's heard anything about someone looking for a missing wife." "You know a lot of people around these parts," Catherine observed. Henry shrugged. "I've been driving cattle through this territory for years. You get to know the lay of the land and the people on it." They mounted up again and continued their journey, the sun high overhead now. Catherine found herself hyper-aware of Henry's presence behind her, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his breath occasionally stirring her hair. It was unsettling how safe she felt with this man she'd known for less than a day. As the afternoon wore on, the land began to change, with more scattered homesteads visible in the distance. They were getting closer to civilization, and Catherine felt both relief and trepidation. Town meant safety in numbers, but it also meant more eyes that might report back to Frank. "There," Henry said eventually, pointing to a cluster of buildings in a valley ahead. "That's Miller's place." As they approached, Catherine saw a well-maintained ranch house with several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing in nearby pastures. It was a prosperous-looking operation, speaking to years of hard work and good management. A man emerged from the barn as they rode up, shading his eyes against the sun. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with white hair and a beard to match. "Well, I'll be," he called out. "Henry Blackwood. Didn't expect to see you this season." "Afternoon, Miller," Henry replied as they came to a stop. "Sorry to arrive unannounced." Miller's eyes moved to Catherine, taking in her appearance, the torn dress, the bruises Henry's had on her head. His expression grew serious. "Looks like you two could use some help." "We could," Henry agreed, dismounting and helping Catherine down. "This is Catherine Winters. She's in some trouble." Miller nodded, no questions asked. "Mrs. Winters, welcome to my home. Let's get you both inside." "My wife will want to fuss over you something proper." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Just Miller is fine, madam. Everyone calls me that, even the missus sometimes." He led them toward the house, calling out as they approached, "Martha." "We've got company." A plump, motherly woman appeared at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her face creased into a warm smile that faltered slightly when she saw Catherine's condition. "Oh, you poor dear," she said immediately, coming forward to take Catherine's arm. "Come inside right away. I'll draw you a bath and find you some clean clothes." Catherine found herself swept into the house, and the capable hands of Martha Miller, who asked no questions but efficiently set about caring for her unexpected guest. Within an hour, Catherine had bathed in real hot water for the first time in months. Her hair had been washed and combed, and she was wearing a clean dress that Martha had altered quickly to fit her smaller frame. "There now," Martha said approvingly, guiding Catherine to a mirror. "That's better." Catherine hardly recognized the woman who looked back at her. With the dirt and fear washed away, she could see glimpses of her former self, the young woman who had once had dreams and ambitions. The bruises were still visible, but they seemed less defining now. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," she said sincerely. "Your kindness means more than I can say." "Martha, please," the older woman insisted. "And there's no need for thanks. Any decent person would do the same." She hesitated before adding, "Henry told Miller a bit about your situation. You're safe here, dear. No one will harm you under this roof." Catherine nodded, emotion making it difficult to speak. Martha patted her hand understandingly. "Come have some food. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in ages." In the kitchen, Henry and Miller were deep in conversation that stopped when the women entered. Henry stood immediately, his eyes widening slightly as he took in Catherine's transformed appearance. "You look," he began, then seemed to lose his train of thought. "Much better," Miller supplied with a knowing glance at his wife. "Martha has that effect on people." They sat down to a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Catherine couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten so well. Frank had often withheld food as punishment, and even on good days, he expected her to serve him first and eat whatever was left. As they ate, Miller updated them on the local situation. "There's been a stranger asking questions in town since this morning," he said gravely. "Described as a big man with a mean look about him. Been showing folks a daguerreotype of a woman and offering money for information." Catherine's appetite vanished instantly. "Frank," she whispered. "He must have ridden straight to town when he found me gone." "Figured as much," Miller said. "Word is, he's claiming his wife's been abducted, offering a reward for her return." "That's not true," Catherine exclaimed. "I left of my own accord because he was going to kill me." "We believe you, dear," Martha assured her, covering Catherine's hand with her own. "And so will Sheriff Davis when he hears the full story. He's a good man who doesn't abide by husbands mistreating their wives." "The problem," Miller added, "is that legally Frank has rights as your husband. The sheriff can protect you from violence, but he can't stop Frank from claiming you as his wife." Catherine felt the walls closing in again. Even miles away from the ranch, Frank's control extended over her life like a shadow. "There are options," Henry said quietly, speaking for the first time since the conversation had turned to Frank. "Nevada's not far. Divorce laws are more favorable there." "Divorce," Catherine whispered the word like a forbidden incantation. The very idea seemed impossible. "It's becoming more common," Martha said gently, "especially in cases like yours. But first," Miller interjected practically, "we need to get you safely away from here. Your husband has men watching the roads into town. If you try to take the stage, they'll spot you for certain." Catherine looked at Henry, finding his steady gaze already on her. "What do we do?" she asked. Henry considered for a moment. "Miller, is Davis still sheriff in these parts?" Miller nodded. "Going on 15 years now." "Then I think we need to speak with him," Henry said. "Not in town, but here if he'd be willing to ride out." "He would for me," Miller confirmed. "We go back a long way." "Good," Henry said. "Send for him tonight. In the meantime, Catherine should stay inside, away from windows, just in case Frank decides to check the outlying ranches." Miller rose from the table. "I'll send my son Jacob right away. Davis should be here by morning." After Miller left to find his son, Martha insisted that both Catherine and Henry get some rest. She showed Catherine to a small but comfortable bedroom, promising that Henry would be in the room next door if she needed anything. "Thank you again," Catherine said as Martha turned to leave. "I don't know what I would have done without Henry's help, and now yours." Martha's kind face softened with compassion. "The Lord puts people in our path when we need them most, dear. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out your next steps." Left alone, Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 24 hours. Yesterday at this time, she had been preparing Frank's dinner, walking on eggshells to avoid his volatile temper. Now she was miles away, surrounded by kind strangers who were risking themselves to help her, and then there was Henry. Catherine still couldn't quite believe that a man she'd never met before last night had put himself in danger to help her escape. Frank had taught her to believe that all men were like him, selfish, cruel, seeing women as possessions rather than people. Henry was proving that assumption wrong with every action he took. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Catherine," Henry's voice was low. "Are you all right?" She crossed to the door and opened it slightly. Henry stood in the hallway, concern evident in his eyes. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just processing everything." Henry nodded. "It's a lot to take in. I wanted to let you know that Jacob has gone to fetch the sheriff, and Miller has men watching the property just as a precaution. Do you think Frank will find us here?" Catherine couldn't keep the fear from her voice. "It's unlikely," Henry said, "but I prefer to be cautious. Try to get some sleep. I'll be next door if you need anything." "Henry," Catherine said impulsively, catching his arm as he turned to go, "why are you doing all this for me?" You don't even know me." Henry was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My mother," he said finally. "She was in a situation similar to yours. My father was not a kind man. One night things got bad, worse than usual. A neighbor stepped in, helped us get away. We might not have survived otherwise." He met her eyes directly. "I swore then that if I ever came across someone who needed that kind of help, I wouldn't look the other way." Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with profound gratitude and connection. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly, "and thank you for not looking the other way." Henry nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Get some rest, Catherine. Things will look better in the morning." As he walked away, Catherine closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about the possibility of a future one where she might actually be happy. Morning came with the rich aroma of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen below. Catherine dressed quickly in the clothes Martha had provided and made her way downstairs, following the sounds of conversation. In the kitchen, she found Henry and Miller seated at the table with a third man, tall and lean, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a badge on his vest that identified him as Sheriff Davis. All three men stood when she entered. Henry's eyes met hers with a warmth that made her breath catch slightly. "Mrs. Winters," Sheriff Davis said, gesturing for her to sit. "I'm glad to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Miller and Henry have told me some of your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you if you're willing." Catherine nodded and took a seat, accepting the cup of coffee Martha placed before her with a grateful smile. Then, slowly at first but with growing confidence, she told her story how she had met Frank when she was young and impressionable, how the charming suitor had transformed into a controlling husband, and how the control had escalated to violence over the years. Sheriff Davis listened without interruption, his face grave. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Thank you for sharing that, Mrs. Winters. It can't have been easy." "What happens now?" Catherine asked, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "Your husband is in town," Davis confirmed. "Been making quite a scene, claiming you've been kidnapped, offering $100 for information leading to your return." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. $100, people will be looking everywhere." "Yes," Davis agreed. "Which is why we need to move carefully. Legally, the situation is complicated. As your husband, Frank has certain rights under the law, but," he added, seeing her expression, "those rights don't extend to assault or threatening your life." "He'll deny it," Catherine said bitterly. "He always does. And people believe him because he can be so charming when he wants to be." "I believe you," Davis said simply. "And I've known Frank Winters by reputation for some time. This isn't the first I've heard of his temper." Henry, who had been silent during Catherine's recounting, spoke up. "What are our options, Davis?" the sheriff considered. "The safest course would be to get Mrs. Winters out of the territory as quickly as possible. Once she's beyond Frank's reach, she can pursue a divorce in a state with more favorable laws." "Frank will follow me," Catherine said with certainty. "He won't let me go." "Not if he can't find you," Henry pointed out, "and not if he has other concerns to deal with." Davis raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting, Blackwood?" "Frank Winters has made enemies," Henry said. "Not just his wife, I've been asking around. Seems he's in debt to some serious people in Helena. Gambling debts, mostly." Miller let out a low whistle. "That would explain why he's so desperate to keep control of the ranch. Without it as collateral, those creditors might get mighty impatient." "Exactly," Henry said. "What if those creditors were to learn that Frank is in town, spending money on a reward instead of paying his debts?" A slow smile spread across Davis's face. "That would certainly give him something to worry about besides tracking down his wife." "It's not a permanent solution," Henry cautioned, looking at Catherine, "but it might buy us the time we need to get you safely to Colorado." Catherine felt a surge of hope, tempered by wariness. "Us?" she questioned softly. Henry met her gaze steadily. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone, Catherine. Not until I know you're safe with your family." The conviction in his voice left no room for argument, though Catherine wasn't sure she wanted to argue. The idea of Henry accompanying her to Colorado brought more comfort than she cared to admit. "So that's our plan," she asked, looking around at the three men. "Create a distraction with Frank's creditors while we slip out of the territory? With some modifications," Davis said. "I think it would be best if we were to have a record of Frank's threats against you. Something official that could support a divorce petition later." "How would we do that?" Catherine asked. "You could file a complaint with me," Davis explained. "Officially document the abuse. I can't arrest Frank on your word alone, but having the complaint on record would strengthen your case considerably." Catherine considered this. The idea of officially accusing Frank was terrifying. It would enrage him beyond measure, but if she truly wanted freedom, she needed to be brave. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I want this on record." Davis nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll draw up the paperwork today. In the meantime, Miller's Ranch is probably the safest place for you. Frank doesn't know about your connection to Henry, and he's unlikely to come looking here specifically." As if on cue, one of Miller's ranch hands burst into the kitchen, his expression urgent. "Riders coming, boss, 4 of them. One matches the description of that fella who's been asking about his wife in town." Catherine's heart seemed to stop. "Frank," she whispered. "He's found me." Miller was already on his feet. "How did he know to look here?" "Someone must have seen us arrive yesterday," Henry said grimly, moving to look out the window, "or recognized Jupiter in your corral." "There's no time to get you away," Davis said to Catherine. "They'll see you leaving." "The cellar," Martha suggested quickly. "They won't think to look there," Miller nodded. "Good idea. Catherine, go with Martha. The rest of us will deal with Winters." Catherine hesitated, looking at Henry. "Be careful," she said softly. "Frank is dangerous when he's angry." "So am I," Henry replied, his voice low and determined. "Go, we'll handle this." Martha led Catherine through the kitchen to a door in the floor, pulling it open to reveal stone steps leading down into darkness. "Hurry, dear," she urged. "There's a lamp down there already lit. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear above." Catherine descended quickly, her heart pounding as Martha closed the door above her, plunging her into near darkness except for the faint glow of a lamp in the corner. She made her way to it, adjusting the wick to provide more light, then sat on a barrel, straining to hear what was happening above. Muffled voices reached her Miller's greeting, a response in a voice that made her blood run cold. Frank was inside the house. Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, trembling despite the warmth of the cellar. "I'm looking for my wife." Frank's voice became clearer as he apparently moved into the kitchen directly above her. "Catherine Winters, slim build, light brown hair. She ran off yesterday. I have reason to believe she might have passed this way." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Miller's voice replied evenly, "but we don't get many travelers out this way." "Mind if I look around?" Frank's tone was polite, but Catherine could hear the underlying menace. "She might have come through without you noticing." "My property is open to the sheriff," Miller said carefully, "but I don't know you, Mr. Winters. I'll have to ask you to state your business more clearly." "My business is finding my wife," Frank snapped, the false politeness evaporating. "And I'll look wherever I damn well please." "That's not how things work around here," Sheriff Davis's voice cut in. "I'm Sheriff Davis from town. If you have reason to believe your wife is being held somewhere against her will, you can file a formal complaint with me." There was a pause before Frank responded, his tone now wary. "Sheriff, didn't expect to find you out here." "I go where I'm needed," Davis replied. "Now, about this wife of yours. Interesting coincidence, I had a report just yesterday about a Frank Winters who supposedly threatened to kill his wife." "That wouldn't be you, would it?" Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth, barely breathing as she listened to the confrontation above. "Who told you that?" Frank demanded. "It's a lie. Catherine is confused, emotional. She's not well." "Seems perfectly lucid to me." Henry's voice joined the conversation, and Catherine could picture him stepping forward to face Frank directly. "Who the hell are you?" Frank's voice rose in anger. "Name's Henry Blackwood. I had the pleasure of helping your wife escape after you threatened to put her in the ground. Those were your words, I believe." There was a loud crash, something being overturned, and the sounds of a scuffle. Catherine stood, her heart in her throat, wanting desperately to know what was happening but afraid to open the cellar door. Shouts and the sounds of bodies colliding continued for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only moments. Then a gunshot rang out, the sound deafening even through the floorboards. Catherine stifled a scream, terror freezing her in place. Who had been shot? Henry, the sheriff, or had Frank? Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing, and then Davis's voice, tight with authority. That's enough. The next man who moves gets a bullet. Winters, you're under arrest for assault and threatening an officer of the law. Relief made Catherine's knees weak. The sheriff was alive at least, but Henry. The cellar door opened suddenly, light spilling down the stairs. Catherine, Martha called softly. It's safe to come up now. Catherine rushed up the stairs to find the kitchen in disarray, a chair overturned, dishes broken on the floor. Sheriff Davis had Frank pressed against the wall, securing his hands behind his back with iron cuffs. Two men Catherine didn't recognize, presumably some of the riders who had come with Frank, stood against the far wall, looking uncertain. And Henry, her heart leapt when she saw him, was standing by the table, a cut on his cheek, but otherwise apparently unharmed. Frank's head snapped up when she entered, his eyes burning with rage. There you are, you ungrateful whore, he spat. Think you can just run away from me? I own you. That's enough, Davis said sharply, giving Frank a rough shake. One more word and I'll add additional charges. Catherine stood tall, meeting Frank's gaze without flinching for the first time in years. You don't own me, Frank. You never did. Our marriage is over. Frank lunged toward her despite the sheriff's restraining grip, his face contorted with fury. It's over when I say it's over. You think you can just leave? Where will you go? Who would want damaged goods like you? Henry stepped between them, his back to Catherine, shielding her from Frank's rage. No one will cross that fence, Winters, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Not you, not your men, not anyone who means her harm. Catherine is under my protection now. Your protection? Frank sneered. Who the hell do you think you are? Someone who knows how to treat a woman with respect, Henry replied evenly. Something you clearly never learned. Sheriff Davis pulled Frank back. That's enough out of you, Winters. You're going to jail until a judge can hear about these threats you've been making. He glanced at his two deputies who had been waiting silently. Take him to town, I'll be right behind you. As the deputies dragged a still cursing Frank from the house, Davis turned to Catherine. Mrs. Winters, I'd like you to come to town later today to file that formal complaint. It will strengthen the case against him. Catherine nodded, her eyes still on the doorway where Frank had disappeared. Will he stay in jail for assaulting a lawman? Absolutely, Davis assured her. The judge won't be through these parts for at least a month. That should give you plenty of time to get safely to Colorado. After the sheriff left, promising to send word when it was safe for Catherine to come to town, silence fell in the kitchen. Martha immediately began cleaning up the mess, waving away offers of help. Are you all right? Henry asked Catherine quietly, touching his own cheek where blood was drying from the cut Frank had given him during their scuffle. I should be asking you that, Catherine replied, impulsively reaching up to examine the cut. Let me help you clean this. Martha, observing the interaction with knowing eyes, silently provided a basin of warm water and clean cloths before tactfully retreating from the kitchen, pulling a protesting Miller along with her. Catherine dipped a cloth in the water and gently cleaned the cut on Henry's cheek, acutely aware of his eyes on her face as she worked. The touch felt intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. Thank you, she said softly, for what you said to Frank about me being under your protection. I meant it, Henry replied, his voice equally quiet. I won't let him hurt you again, Catherine. She lowered the cloth, her eyes meeting his. Why do you care so much? We barely know each other. Henry was silent for a moment, considering her question. Sometimes, he said finally, you just know when something is right, when someone is worth fighting for. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. I've known you less than 2 days, but I feel like I've been waiting to meet you my whole life. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Catherine felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, not the desperate need for approval that had characterized her feelings for Frank in the early days, but something stronger, cleaner. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not just of Frank, but of feeling anything for anyone again. He broke something in me, Henry. I don't know if it can be fixed. Nothing about you is broken, Henry said with quiet conviction. Wounded, maybe, healing, definitely, but not broken. His hand still held hers against his face. And I'm not asking for anything, Catherine, just the chance to help you get safely to your family. Whatever comes after that, well, that's for you to decide when you're ready. Catherine nodded, overwhelmed by the simple respect in his words. Frank had never given her choices, never considered her feelings or desires. Henry was offering her freedom in more ways than one. Thank you, she whispered again, slowly withdrawing her hand. Henry smiled, the expression transforming his face despite the cut on his cheek. We should probably rescue the Millers from whatever room they're pretending to be busy in, he suggested lightly. Catherine laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had truly laughed? You're right, she agreed. Poor Martha is probably dying to come clean up her kitchen properly. As predicted, the Millers returned almost immediately when called, Martha fussing over the state of her kitchen while Miller updated them on the latest news from one of his ranch hands. Frank and his men had been taken to town without further incident, and the sheriff had posted a deputy at the end of the road leading to the ranch, just as a precaution. You'll be safe here until you're ready to move on, Miller assured them, though I expect you'll want to head to Colorado as soon as possible. Catherine looked at Henry, who nodded. The sooner the better, he agreed. Once we file that complaint with Davis, there's nothing keeping us here. Us, Catherine repeated softly, the word filling her with unexpected warmth. If that's all right with you, Henry added quickly. I promise to see you safely to your family, and I intend to keep that promise. It's more than all right, Catherine assured him. I don't think I could make the journey alone. Later that afternoon, with a deputy as escort, Catherine and Henry rode into town to file the formal complaint against Frank. The small sheriff's office was attached to the jail, and though Catherine tensed at the thought of being so close to Frank, Davis assured her that her husband was securely locked away and would not be able to see or speak to her. Sitting at Davis's desk, Catherine carefully documented years of abuse, her hand steady as she signed the formal statement. It felt like closing a chapter of her life that had gone on far too long. What happens now? She asked as Davis filed the paperwork. Now, the sheriff said, you start fresh. There's a stage leaving for Denver tomorrow morning. I've arranged 2 seats for you. Thank you, Catherine said sincerely. For everything, Davis shook his head. No need for thanks, just doing my job. He hesitated before adding, and it's about time someone stood up to Frank Winters. Man's been a menace in these parts for years. They left the sheriff's office with arrangements made for the morning stage. As they walked down the main street toward where they had left their horses, Catherine was acutely aware of curious eyes following them. Word had clearly spread about Frank's arrest and her part in it. Don't mind them, Henry said quietly, noticing her discomfort. Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough. Catherine nodded, quickening her pace slightly. I'll be glad to be gone from here, she admitted. Too many memories. Colorado will be a new start, Henry said encouragingly, and your cousin Emma sounds like good people. You'll have support there. They reached their horses, and Henry helped Catherine mount before swinging up onto Jupiter's back. The horse had recovered well with proper care, though Henry was still careful not to push him too hard on the ride back to Miller's ranch. As they rode, Catherine found herself thinking about the future, a future without fear, without constantly walking on eggshells. A future where she might teach again, or perhaps do something entirely different. The possibilities stretched before her like an open road, and then there was Henry. She glanced at him riding beside her, his profile strong against the afternoon sky. What role would he play in this new future of hers? He had promised to see her safely to Colorado, but after that. Catherine wasn't ready to examine her feelings too closely, but she knew that the thought of saying goodbye to Henry filled her with a sadness that had nothing to do with gratitude for his help. They spent the evening with the Millers, enjoying a hearty meal and genuine companionship. Martha had packed supplies for their journey, food, a change of clothes for Catherine, even a small sewing kit just in case. You've done so much for us, Catherine said as they sat around the table after dinner. I don't know how to thank you. Live well, Martha said simply. Be happy. That's thanks enough. And maybe stop by if you're ever passing through again, Miller added with a twinkle in his eye. Always good to see old friends. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for traveling. Henry and Catherine said their goodbyes to the Millers, promising to write once they were settled in Colorado. The ride to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. The stage was already waiting when they arrived, a few other passengers milling about as luggage was loaded. Sheriff Davis was there too, keeping a watchful eye on proceedings. "No trouble from our guest?" Henry asked him, nodding toward the jail. "None," Davis confirmed. "Though he's made plenty of threats about what he'll do when he gets out. Judge Matthews isn't likely to be lenient, especially with that formal complaint on file." Catherine felt a chill despite the warm morning. Even locked away, Frank's shadow seemed to stretch toward her. "Remember," Davis continued, speaking directly to Catherine, "the paperwork I gave you should help with filing for divorce in Colorado. Their laws are more progressive than most." "Thank you, Sheriff," Catherine said, shaking his hand, "for everything." As they boarded the stage, Henry stowed their few belongings and then settled beside Catherine on the hard wooden seat. Other passengers joined them, an elderly couple traveling to visit their daughter, a young man headed west to seek his fortune, and a middle-aged woman returning home after visiting relatives. The driver called out, the horses strained forward, and the stage lurched into motion. Catherine looked back through the small window, watching the town recede behind them. Somewhere in that jail, Frank was plotting his revenge, but for the first time she felt beyond his reach. "All right?" Henry asked quietly, his shoulder warm against hers as the stage swayed along the rutted road. Catherine turned to him with a small smile. "Yes," she said truthfully. "I think I really am." The journey to Denver would take several days, with stops at various stations along the way for fresh horses and meals. The accommodations were basic, the travel rough, but Catherine found herself enjoying the adventure of it. Each mile that passed put more distance between her and her old life, bringing her closer to a future she was beginning to believe might actually hold happiness. Henry proved to be an ideal traveling companion, attentive without being overbearing, respectful of her need for space, yet always nearby if she needed him. In the evenings at the way stations, they would often sit together on whatever porch or bench was available, watching the sunset and talking quietly about everything and nothing. Catherine learned that Henry had grown up in Texas, the son of a rancher. After his mother fled with him from his abusive father, they had struggled for years before his mother remarried a kind shopkeeper. Henry had worked cattle drives since he was 16, saving his money carefully with the dream of someday having a small ranch of his own. "Not a big spread," he explained as they sat outside a station on their third night of travel. "Just enough land for a decent herd, a good house, somewhere to put down roots." "It sounds wonderful," Catherine said sincerely. "Do you have a place picked out?" Henry nodded, his eyes on the horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. "There's a valley in northern Colorado. Good water, good grass, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms. I've had my eye on it for a couple of years now. Almost have enough saved to make an offer." "Colorado," Catherine repeated softly. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence that Henry's dream lay in the same territory where she was headed, did not escape her notice. Henry glanced at her, something unspoken in his eyes. "It's good country," he said simply, "for new beginnings." The stage rolled into Denver on a bright morning 5 days after leaving Montana. The city was bustling with activity, miners, merchants, families, all part of the great westward expansion that was transforming the territory. Catherine stared out the window with wide eyes, taking in the mix of substantial brick buildings and hastily constructed wooden structures that marked a city growing faster than it could properly build. "It's so much bigger than I expected," she commented as Henry helped her down from the stage. "Biggest city between St. Louis and San Francisco," Henry agreed, collecting their bags. "Your cousin's place is it in the city itself?" Catherine shook her head, consulting the letter she had kept all these years. "She lives in a town called Silver Creek, about 20 miles north of here. Her husband has mining interests there." Henry nodded. We can rent horses and be there by nightfall if you're not too tired." "I'd like that," Catherine said. The idea of reuniting with Emma after so many years filled her with both excitement and nervousness. What if her cousin's circumstances had changed? What if she wasn't welcome? Henry seemed to read her thoughts. "I'm sure your cousin will be happy to see you," he said gently. "Family is family." They secured horses from a livery stable and set out northward, following directions provided by the stable owner. The road was well traveled, winding through rolling hills that gradually gave way to more mountainous terrain. The beauty of the landscape took Catherine's breath away. The majestic peaks in the distance, the clear streams, the forests of pine and aspen. "It's beautiful here," she said as they paused to rest the horses beside a small creek. "So different from Montana." "Different from Texas, too," Henry agreed, filling their canteens with the cold, clear water. "But I liked it from the first time I drove cattle through here." They continued their journey, and by late afternoon they crested a hill to see a small town nestled in a valley below. Silver Creek was clearly a mining town, with several large structures that could only be processing mills dominating one end of the settlement. The rest was a mix of businesses and homes, some quite substantial, indicating the prosperity that silver had brought to the area. "That must be it," Catherine said, excitement and anxiety warring within her. Henry nodded, studying the town below. "Looks like a decent place, bigger than I expected for a mining town." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The main street was busy with activity, miners coming off shift, shopkeepers closing up for the day, women gathering for evening socials, children playing in the dusty street. Catherine stopped a passing woman to ask directions to the Carter residence. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Joseph Carter's place, that's the big house at the north end of town, up on the hill, can't miss it." She looked at Catherine curiously. "You friends of the Carters?" "Emma Carter is my cousin," Catherine explained. "We haven't seen each other in many years." The woman's expression softened. "Well, isn't that nice? Emma's good people. The whole family is. Their house is right up that road, about half a mile." They thanked her and continued on, following the indicated path. As they rounded a bend, Catherine gasped softly. The house was more accurately described as a mansion, a large two-story structure of red brick with white trim, surrounded by well-tended gardens and a wrought iron fence. "My goodness," she whispered. "Emma has done well for herself." Henry glanced at her, concern in his eyes. Having second thoughts, Catherine shook her head firmly. "No, Emma was never one to judge by appearances. If she's changed that much, then I'll find somewhere else to go, but I have to try." They approached the gate, where a middle-aged man was tending to the garden. He straightened as they dismounted, eyeing them with polite curiosity. "Can I help you folks?" "We're looking for Emma Carter," Catherine said. "I'm her cousin, Catherine Winters." The man's face broke into a smile. "Well now, Miss Emma's been wondering if she'd ever hear from you again. She'll be beside herself." He opened the gate, gesturing for them to enter. "I'm George, the caretaker. Bring your horses right on up to the house. I'll take care of them after you're settled." Catherine's heart lightened at this warm reception. They followed George up the curved driveway to the house, where he instructed them to wait on the porch while he announced their arrival. Left alone, Catherine smoothed her travel-worn dress self-consciously. "I must look a fright," she murmured. "You look beautiful," Henry said quietly, the simple sincerity in his voice making her blush. Before she could respond, the front door flew open, and a woman rushed out, slightly plump, with familiar warm brown eyes and hair more gray than Catherine remembered, but unmistakably Emma. "Catherine." She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Is it really you, Emma?" Catherine managed before being enveloped in a fierce embrace. "Oh my God," Emma was saying, half laughing, half crying. "I can't believe it, after all these years. Joseph, Joseph, come quickly, Catherine is here." A tall, distinguished-looking man appeared in the doorway, smiling broadly at his wife's excitement. "So I see," he said warmly, "and she's brought a friend." Emma released Catherine, wiping tears from her cheeks as she turned to Henry. "I'm so sorry, where are my manners?" "I'm Emma Carter, and this is my husband, Joseph." Henry removed his hat politely. Henry Blackwood, madam, sir. Pleased to meet you. Any friend of Catherine's is welcome in our home, Joseph said, stepping forward to shake Henry's hand. Please, both of you, come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey. They were ushered into a beautifully appointed parlor where Emma rang for tea while peppering Catherine with questions. Where had she been? What had happened to her? Why had she stopped writing? It's a long story, Catherine said, glancing at Henry, who nodded encouragingly. And not all of it is pleasant. We have time, Emma said, reaching out to squeeze her cousin's hand. All the time you need. Over tea and then dinner, Catherine shared her story, her marriage to Frank, the gradual escalation of his control and abuse, her desperate escape, and Henry's intervention. Emma listened with growing horror, Joseph with quiet anger, both of them occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly allowing Catherine to tell her tale at her own pace. "Oh, Catherine," Emma said when she had finished, tears in her eyes, "if I had known. We would have come for you, Joseph and I. We would never have left you in that situation." "I know," Catherine assured her, "but Frank made sure I was isolated. He intercepted my mail, told me you had moved away and left no forwarding address. By the time I realized he was lying, I was too afraid to try to contact you." Joseph turned to Henry, his expression grave. "Mr. Blackwood, I cannot thank you enough for what you've done for Catherine. You put yourself at considerable risk to help a stranger." Henry shook his head. "I did what any decent man would do," he said simply. "Catherine is the brave one. She's the one who decided to leave knowing the danger." Emma smiled, looking between them with a knowing expression that made Catherine blush slightly. "Well, you're both welcome to stay with us as long as you like. Catherine, of course, has a home here for as long as she wants one. And Mr. Blackwood, we insist you stay at least until you're properly rested." "That's very kind," Henry said, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Joseph declared. "We have plenty of room. And I'd like to hear more about your cattle driving experiences. I've been considering expanding into livestock myself." As the evening wore on, Catherine felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Emma was still the same warm, loving person she remembered, and Joseph proved to be equally kind and welcoming. Their two children, William, 14, and Sarah, 12, joined them later and were introduced to their Aunt Catherine with enthusiasm. When Catherine finally retired to the guest room Emma had prepared for her, she felt overwhelmed by emotions: relief, gratitude, hope, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name whenever she thought of Henry. There was a soft knock at her door. Opening it, she found Emma standing there, a nightgown and robe draped over her arm. "I thought you might need these," her cousin said, entering the room and closing the door behind her. "We're about the same size, I think." "Thank you," Catherine said, accepting the garments gratefully. "For everything, Emma. Your welcome means more than I can say." Emma sat on the edge of the bed, patting the spot beside her. When Catherine joined her, Emma took her hand firmly. "You are family, Catherine. You will always have a home with us." Tears filled Catherine's eyes. "I don't know what I would have done if you had turned me away." "As if I would ever," Emma scoffed. "Now, about Mr. Blackwood." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "What about him?" Emma's eyes twinkled. "Don't play innocent with me, Catherine Williams. I saw the way you look at him. And the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." We're not." Catherine stammered. "He's just been very kind." "Kind," Emma repeated with a knowing smile. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" "Emma," Catherine protested, but couldn't help smiling. "It's not like that. Henry helped me when I was desperate and he brought me safely here, that's all." "If you say so," Emma said, clearly unconvinced. "But for what it's worth, he seems like a good man, strong, reliable, handsome too in that rugged way." Catherine didn't deny any of these observations. "It's too soon," she said instead. "After Frank, I don't know if I can trust my judgment again." Emma's expression softened. "Of course, you need time to heal, but don't close your heart completely, Catherine. Not all men are like Frank. Joseph has never raised his voice to me in 15 years of marriage, let alone his hand." "I know," Catherine said. "I just need time, and you shall have it," Emma assured her, standing and kissing her cousin's cheek. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow we'll go shopping. You need a proper wardrobe if you're going to stay in Silver Creek." After Emma left, Catherine changed into the borrowed nightgown and stood by the window, looking out at the starlit sky. For the first time in years, she felt safe. For the first time in years, she felt free to imagine a future of her own choosing, and if that future included a certain cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands. Well, perhaps Emma was right. Perhaps it was too soon to close her heart completely. The days that followed took on a rhythm that Catherine found both healing and joyful. She spent time with Emma and her children, reconnecting with her cousin and getting to know her niece and nephew. Joseph, true to his word, took Henry under his wing, showing him the mining operations and discussing the cattle business with genuine interest. To Catherine's surprise, Henry showed no signs of continuing his journey south to look at the land he had mentioned. When she finally asked him about it one evening as they walked in the garden after dinner, he seemed almost embarrassed. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that," he said, stopping by a rose bush in full bloom. "Joseph has offered me a job. He's serious about expanding into cattle and he wants me to manage that side of his business." "Here, in Silver Creek," Catherine couldn't keep the hope from her voice. Henry nodded, his eyes searching her face. "It's a good opportunity, fair pay, a chance to build something, and—" He hesitated, then continued more softly, "I'd be nearby, if that matters to you." Catherine felt her heart beat faster. "It matters," she admitted, "more than I probably should say." A smile spread across Henry's face, transforming his features. "I was hoping you'd say that." "But what about your dream?" Catherine asked. "The valley you wanted to buy." "Dreams can change," Henry said simply, "or expand to include new possibilities." They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken growing between them. Finally, Henry reached out, his fingers just brushing hers. "Catherine, I know it's too soon. You're still healing, still finding your way, but I want you to know that I'll wait, however long it takes." Catherine looked at their hands, so close but not quite joined, and made a decision. She turned her hand, lacing her fingers with his. "I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from what Frank did," she said honestly. "There are scars that may never fade, but I do know that I feel safe with you, Henry. I feel like myself again when I'm with you." Henry's eyes were warm as he gently squeezed her hand. "That's all I could ask for," he said. "The chance to know the real Catherine." 2 months passed, summer turning to early fall in the Colorado mountains. Catherine flourished in Silver Creek, teaching at the local school 3 days a week and helping Emma with various charitable endeavors. The divorce papers had been filed, with Joseph using his connections to expedite the process and ensure that Frank, still in jail in Montana according to Sheriff Davis's letters, could not contest it. Her friendship with Henry deepened as they spent time together whenever his duties allowed. He had taken to the cattle business with natural skill, already expanding Joseph's small experimental herd and making plans for the future. They were careful, moving slowly, both aware of the shadows of Catherine's past but increasingly willing to step into the light together. One crisp October evening, Henry invited Catherine for a ride to see a new property. Joseph had acquired a beautiful stretch of valley land about 5 miles from town. As they crested a hill overlooking the valley, Catherine gasped at the view. Golden aspen trees mingled with dark pines, a clear stream winding through lush meadows, and mountains rising majestically in the background. "It's beautiful," she breathed, reining her horse to a stop beside Henry's. "It is," he agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the landscape. "It's also the valley I told you about, the one I've had my eye on for years." Catherine turned to him in surprise. "This is the place." "But you said—" "I said I almost had enough saved to make an offer," Henry finished for her. What I didn't know was that Joseph had already purchased it as part of his expansion plans. When I described it to him, he realized what it was and he hesitated. "He's offered to sell it to me. At a fair price with terms I can manage." "Henry, that's wonderful," Catherine exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "There's more," Henry said, suddenly looking nervous. He dismounted and came to help her down from her horse. Once they were both standing, he took her hands in his. "Joseph is willing to include the parcel in my compensation package if I stay on permanently as his livestock manager." "And will you?" Catherine asked, her heart beating faster. "That depends," Henry said softly. "On you, me." Henry took a deep breath. Catherine, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing you grow stronger every day, watching you reclaim your life with such courage. I've fallen in love with you, completely, irrevocably in love. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. Henry. I'm not asking for an answer now, he said quickly. I know it's still early, that you're still healing, but I wanted you to know where my heart stands, and that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, this dream of mine has room for two. Catherine looked out over the valley, imagining a house nestled among those trees, a garden, perhaps children playing by the stream. For so long she hadn't dared to dream of a future at all. Now, standing beside this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, she found that she could picture it clearly. I think, she said slowly, turning back to Henry, that I might be ready sooner than either of us expected. Hope blazed in Henry's eyes. Catherine. I love you too, Henry, she said, the words feeling right, feeling true in a way nothing had with Frank. I think part of me has loved you since that night in the barn when you offered help to a stranger. Henry's smile was radiant as he raised a hand to gently cup her cheek. May I? He asked softly. Catherine nodded, and Henry leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't want to pull away. She wanted him with a certainty that left no room for doubt. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as Catherine responded with a passion she had thought long dead. Henry's arms encircled her waist, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure, while her hands found their way to his shoulders, solid and reassuring beneath her touch. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. I promise you, Catherine, he whispered, that you will never again have to hide in fear, not from me, not from anyone. I know, she said, and realized it was true. She did know, with a bone-deep certainty that defied logic but felt undeniably right. No one will cross that fence. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Catherine stood in Emma's garden, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands and joy in her heart. Across from her stood Henry, handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving hers as the minister spoke the words that would bind them together as husband and wife. The small gathering of witnesses, Emma and Joseph, their children, a few friends from town, and even Sheriff Davis, who had made the journey from Montana, specially watched with smiling faces as vows were exchanged and rings were placed on fingers. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. Mr. Blackwood, you may kiss your bride. As Henry's lips met hers, Catherine felt the last shadows of her past recede, replaced by the bright promise of a future built on mutual respect, kindness, and love. Frank was a distant memory, now serving time for his debts and assaults, no longer a threat to her happiness. That evening, Henry drove Catherine in a new buggy to their home, a sturdy cabin he had built on their land in the valley, with large windows to let in light and a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. It was simple but beautiful, with feminine touches Catherine had added during her visits to oversee the construction. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood, Henry said, lifting her from the buggy and carrying her across the threshold. It's perfect, Catherine said, looking around at the home they had created together, the comfortable furniture, the bookshelves already filled with volumes Joseph and Emma had given them as wedding gifts, the quilt Martha Miller had sent when she heard of their engagement. Later, as they stood on the porch watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Henry's arm around her waist, Catherine felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened her. Happy? Henry asked, seeming to sense her thoughts. Beyond words, she replied honestly. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this has all been a dream. Henry turned her gently to face him. Not a dream, he assured her, just a new chapter, one we're writing together. As he bent to kiss her, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that the fence around their land, around their hearts, would remain unbroken, protecting the love they had found against all odds in a barn in Montana, where a frightened woman had hidden and a good man had stood his ground. 5 years later, Catherine sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Henry teaching their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played contentedly at Catherine's feet while the newest addition to the family, month-old Samuel, slept peacefully in her arms. The ranch had prospered under Henry's careful management. What had started as a small operation was now one of the most successful in the county, with a herd of quality cattle, several good horses, and fields of hay and vegetables that kept the family well-fed year-round. Catherine had continued teaching, establishing a small school on their property that served not only their children but those of neighboring ranches as well. Her reputation as a kind but firm teacher had spread, and parents were eager to have their children benefit from her instruction. The divorce from Frank had been finalized long ago, and news had reached them last year that he had died in a barroom brawl after being released from prison. Catherine had felt nothing but a vague relief that the final thread connecting her to that dark chapter of her life had been severed. "Mama, look," James called excitedly as he guided his pony in a small circle, Henry walking alongside with a watchful eye. "I'm riding by myself. I see you, sweetheart," Catherine called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Henry looked up, meeting her eyes across the yard with a smile that still made her heart beat faster after all these years. The love between them had only deepened with time, strengthened by shared joys and occasional hardships, by the children they had welcomed and the life they had built together. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Henry lifted James from the pony and carried him piggyback toward the house, the boys' delighted laughter filling the air. Elizabeth abandoned her toys to run to meet them, arms outstretched for her turn to be carried. Catherine watched them approach, her family a family built on love and respect, on kindness and honesty. The bruises Frank had inflicted, both physical and emotional, had long since faded. In their place was a confidence, a certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the people she was meant to love. Henry climbed the porch steps with a child in each arm, his smile tender as he bent to kiss Catherine and peer at their sleeping son. "How are my favorite people in the world?" he asked. "Perfect," Catherine replied, meaning it with all her heart. "Absolutely perfect." As the family gathered around the dinner table later that evening, saying grace and sharing stories of their day, Catherine looked around at the faces she loved most in the world and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From a terrified woman hiding in a barn to the matriarch of a thriving family, her journey had been one of courage and healing, of learning to trust again and opening her heart to love. And through it all, Henry had been her constant, her protector, her friend, her partner, her love. No one had crossed that fence he had promised to maintain around her, the invisible boundary that kept harm at bay and love safely within. And no one ever would.